Well, my name is Jessica Mahiran, and I am with an outreach coordinator with the North Idaho Pride Alliance. I also am a community organizer for a local organization called Civic Engagement Alliance, which I founded. We do a lot of get out the vote activities and other projects to kind of rally around the common good. I also participated as a community researcher for the Northwest Rural Project, and I am just so happy that we are able to host this event today. I think that you'll find it's very fascinating what we learn through the lived experiences. Today, we would like to introduce a few members from some organizations that are regional that can share a little bit about what they do. I'm going to first start with Teresa Davis. Teresa Davis is the executive director for the North Idaho AIDS Coalition. We do here at NIPA interact quite frequently with them. So Teresa, if you'd like to kind of do an overview about NIAC, go ahead.
Thank you. First, I want to say thank you for the invitation. I'm happy to be here tonight. And for those of you that I have not met already, hi, it's nice to know you. But anyway, I'm the executive director for North Idaho AIDS Coalition. And we've been here for about 32 years in Coeur d'Alene. We started off back in the 80s with 8 gay men who were living with HIV, and they had been discriminated against, and the media had just attacked them. And, you know, I'm sure you're all familiar about what happened in the early days with HIV and AIDS and how gay men were attacked on a daily basis. So it started off as a support group for those 8 men and their families, and then it's just grew over the years. NIAC is the home to the Ryan White Part B program, meaning that is where we do medical case management for those living with HIV. We also help them with oral care, with eye care, getting their medications. From time to time, if they don't have any tires on their car, we try to help them with that as well. Just all kinds of unique needs that they may have. And we want to thank the Pride Foundation for their years of support helping us to meet those needs. We're very grateful to the foundation for all the help that they've given us. So that's one program that we have. It's called Ryan White Part B program, which is predominantly medical case management. Then we have on the other side of the house, we have what's known as the HOPWA program. That's housing opportunities for people living with HIV and AIDS. And what we do there is we try to help those living with HIV and AIDS to find stable housing. It's really been a challenge here in Coeur d'Alene as of late because we have so many people moving in, and the housing prices, not only here in Coeur d'Alene, but across the nation, are just skyrocketing. But we do have that program. Sometimes we have to help them get on waiting list, but we have programs to help them with that. Also, let's say they should have a termination notice for utilities. We can help them get their utilities turned back on. Then we have a third program, and that program is called prevention. And with prevention, what we do is we do HIV and hepatitis C screening, meaning that we have in office, we have a program where a person can just walk in, between our business hours, and we can give them screening right then and there. We're very private. It's very discreet. And we can give them the results within 20 minutes. Let's say that they have a reactive. A reactive is what used to be known as a positive. They have a reactive. We can link them directly with confirmatory services as well as other services that they may need in the community. We also have an MTU, mobile testing unit, that we take out into, this year we've been in about 7 different counties. So we partner with Panhandle Health District, and we take our mobile testing unit into their parking lots in five different counties, and we try to get the word out that we're going to be there, and we do free HIV testing and hepatitis C testing. We also have a myriad of other things that we do. We give out hygiene. We give out hygiene bags. We give out masks. We give out hand sanitizer. And I just want to tell you about the last. Oh no, this is not the last program. We have two more. So we also have a food pantry that was supported. We were able to get that food pantry up and going because of the generous funding, the generous gifting of the Pride Foundation. I want to thank them. They've just been a partner with us for so many years, and they've done so many wonderful things for Nyack. As a matter of fact, they help us start the condom shop as well, where we provide free condoms for anybody who just, you walk in the door as long as you're 16 years old. And now we're sponsored for Project Filter. That is a smoking cessation program. And so we're getting pretty excited about that. What we've been doing is just like promoting it as we promote our other services. And we're going to a ton of Pride events in June. And so we will be promoting Project Filter as well. Another thing I want to tell you, we have really innovative programs, meaning that people no longer have to come to the clinic if they don't want to. We can send them HIV tests and provide coaching right off of our website. So after you get done here, I would encourage you to go take a look at our website so that you could share that information with people that you work with, people in your community, your friends and family. And I think that's pretty much all I have to say right now.
Well, thank you, Teresa. We so appreciate your partnership and you joining us today. Our next partner that I would like to share with is Doug Kim Brown. He is with the LGBTQ seniors of the Inland Northwest. Doug has also been a long-term volunteer with the Pride Alliance and kind of an unofficial advisor, I would say, and a friend. Doug, please tell us all about your group. Oh, you gotta take yourself off mute, Doug.
Technology, yes. Hello, everyone. Good evening. It's nice to be here. Thank you all for coming. About 3 years ago, just over 3 years ago, a small group of people, primarily in Spokane, started getting together under the auspices of Unitarian Universalist Church. Although we're not part of that, they've been willing to host and just been wonderful to us. A small group initially grew quickly, and we were, I would say that to this point, we are primarily a social group of elder being anybody over 60, people who get together. And pre-COVID, we were getting together twice a month for shared food and conversation and some presentations. We also had sort of out and about Wednesdays, I think twice a month, where people would meet at various restaurants and cafes just to get together. Like so many other organizations, with COVID, it really knocked us back. And I think we are a particularly vulnerable group. A lot of the people who plug in with us live alone, and many have no immediate family members. Social isolation was a pretty grim reality for many people. So we started doing Zoom calls, and we got pretty good at that. We usually can unmute ourselves at the right time. And we had, I'd say over the last 15 months, we've had an average of 15 people a week plug in for a Zoom social hour. During that time, we've also had some presentations. Jessica was there talking about the work from North Idaho Pride Alliance. Let me pull up some of the things that we've had. Well, both pre and during COVID, we've had long-term care of Eastern Washington. We've been panel members for some feedback there. The Spectrum Center, elder law, lawyers presenting on rights of seniors. North Idaho Pride Alliance, the Elson S. Floyd College of Medicine. We co-hosted a show, a movie with Jen Silent at the facility there. The LGBTQ Rights Clinic at Gonzaga University did a presentation with us, and some of our members had need of those services. Spokane AIDS Network, we've been partnering with. Pride Foundation has done a couple of presentations. We've partnered with the Spectrum Singers in Spokane for some potlucks and presentations and sort of socially mingling. And Empire Health Foundation, I could go on. I did a presentation not too long ago talking about us. And at that point, I said we were primarily social. But then as I started looking at all the things we've done, my gosh, we've managed to keep this going pretty well for an informal group. We now have a steering committee, and we're looking at next steps, who we might more formally partner with, and perhaps request some grants, pursue that option, and looking at the kind of resource abilities that we do have. So I would say there's a lot cooking with us for a group of sort of old people that take naps after talks, but we're doing okay.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Doug, for joining us today. And then the last partner that I'd like to introduce, we have Tylene Parnell, who is the Regional Philanthropy Officer at Pride Foundation. Now, the North Idaho Pride Alliance, we are very grateful for the ongoing support of the Pride Foundation, which does fund grassroots community organizations like ours. So Tylene, please tell us all about Pride Foundation.
Hey, hi everybody. It's great to be here. Thank you for the invite, actually for the opportunity to come, and thanks everybody for the kind words. But I want to put it back that if it wasn't for the work that everybody does, then we couldn't do what we do. So actually, I'll throw out that as of probably today, maybe announcement coming out tomorrow, title change to Grants Outreach Program Officer across our 5 states. So that should be coming out here fairly soon, I think. So for those of you that don't know much or don't know a lot about Pride Foundation, we are the only LGBTQ community foundation serving the Northwest region, which includes all of Alaska, Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Montana. Our primary mission is fueling transformational movements that advance equity and justice for LGBTQ people in all communities across our region, and work that is grounded in social justice philanthropy. Our core work focuses mostly on building organizations through grant opportunities, supporting students through scholarships, engaging leaders through various initiatives, and advancing equity through different forms of advocacy. Our grants program probably is the cornerstone of our work, and consists of our yearly community grants and a new crisis community care fund that we launched in March of last year as a effort to support LGBTQ community groups and organizations who were responding to the impacts of COVID-19 and whose work had been impacted by the factors surrounding the pandemic. This fund, our Crisis Community Care Fund, also provides resources to Black-led and centered racial justice work in the Northwest, efforts that are addressing the systemic racism and resulted in the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 that has had on BIPOC communities. And I want to run through real quick that this fund, it's new, we just rolled it out last year, and prioritizes work serving and led by LGBTQ people, BIPOC community, Asian, East Asian, and Asian American communities, people living with HIV/AIDS, trans women and femmes, older adults and elders, people with disabilities, and people experiencing homelessness. And really excited to say that through these 2 programs, by the end of 2020, we moved a little more than $1.5 million out to organizations leading the work for equity and justice. And through our scholarship program this year, we awarded just over $600,000 to 95 student leaders. And for the first time, we raised our minimum scholarship amount to $5,000. Additionally, originally launched in 2016 in the midst of the Anti-Trans Initiative 1515, I-1515. Transform Washington prioritized the lifting of stories of trans and gender diverse people throughout Washington. And to better reflect the regional and national work in messaging research, public education, and political advocacy for trans communities, Transform Culture was launched in 2020 as a five-state story collecting campaign. So basically, that's probably what we do mostly in a nutshell. And we just believe that every person should be able to live safely and openly in the communities they call home.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. And I will just give you a little bit of introduction to the North Idaho Pride Alliance, but I first wanted to recognize the North Idaho Pride Alliance board members that are on the call today. We have Laura Bonville. Laura, if you could just raise your hand. Laura is also heads up at Heritage Health, the LGBTQ Advisory Council. They've done some phenomenal work over the last 5 years, and we are frequently interact with them. We also have Julia Merrick on the line. Julia is our secretary and amazing volunteer who helps me with volunteer management. And we also have Sam Koester. He is going to be actually our new president, our board president here in a couple of months. And he also is with the North Idaho College. Kind of coming up for Pride, a few people mentioned it, and I'm just going to share my screen briefly. The big thing that we are promoting right now for those that are fairly local is our CDA for Pride 2021. In years past, we always did Pride in the Park, and of course we plan to do that again next year. But again, this being a weird year with COVID, we wanted to get innovative and creative, and instead of doing one big event, we wanted to do several in-person events throughout the month and with at least one virtual opportunity. And all of this is definitely to raise awareness and build community with all sorts of different educational opportunities and fun. Some of the things that we have going on, from having with Spectrum Center, Spokane, they're going to be doing a workshop with us, working with LGBTQ communities. And we have on the June 5th, we have celebrating Pride Month story time, and that's with our valued partner Community Library Network. And also there's going to be a Pride cruise that's happening with the Globe Bar and a tie-dye party. On the 9th, there is an event that I really hope a lot of people can attend, and it's going to be an inclusion and faith panel discussion and short documentaries night. And we are really going to dive into a conversation about faith and inclusion and kindness. We have an excellent panel that is there. We also have a great event called the Sanctuary of Self-Love, and this is all focused on health and wellness, from a morning walk to doing yoga, Tai Chi. We're going to have our partner Safe Passage and Heritage Health do workshops as well at that event, so we hope that you come by. That is sponsored by Project Filter. And if you just want to have some fun, we're going to have a Pride Night Out on June 16th, where we're going to do an arts and culture crawl. There's a couple of Pride exhibits that we are proud to go visit. Also, the Museum of North Idaho has a wonderful exhibit that they'll be hosting us at, and we'll end the night at the Crown and Thistle for drinks and good food. Some other events that are happening is we have our CDA for Pride Game Social in the park at Ramsey Park, and that is hosted by the Heritage Health LGBTQ Advisory Council. And the big event, which I'm so sorry to say is sold out, is Pride on the Runway, which is going to be an evening of drag, fashion, food, and festivities to benefit North Idaho Pride Alliance. So please feel free to check out our website at nipridealliance.com, where you can see the details to all of these events. Another thing that I would like to raise awareness about is that we've worked very, very hard to develop our LGBTQ resources that we can share out into the community. We were very fortunate through the use of North Idaho College to be able to bring on 2 student interns who help do a lot of this work. And I'm proud to say that it's ready to go for the most part. And so everything from mental health and healthcare to we have a lending library, different faith communities, community businesses that are in the area that we have identified as LGBTQ friendly, and also listings to other community organizations and pride groups. So if you know anyone that's looking for a therapist or looking for a business, please feel free to refer them to here. It's really cool because someone can just, it's using a system called Airtable, and you just can scroll and get the information and the links. So please feel free to share this out with anyone you think may need this information. And now what I'd like to do is introduce our presenters. We have with Miriam Abelson, Associate Professor of Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies at the Portland State University. We have Erin Gislani, Master's Student, University of Idaho, and Bobby Zaman, Doctoral Student, Portland State University. Thank you so much for being here, and please.
Thanks so much, Jessica. Took me a second. Can you all see the PowerPoint screen? Or are you seeing my whole desktop right now? Just the PowerPoint? Okay.
Full desktop, Miriam.
Hold on just a second. Always has to be one snafu, right? Let me try that again. Okay. There we go. Okay, is that better? Well, I want to start by thanking Jessica, especially for all your hard work on the logistics of the event. The rest of the research team you'll be hearing from as well, Erin and Bobby. Thanks to North Idaho Pride Alliance for hosting the event and the co-sponsoring organizations. And for all of you for being here this evening. So our presentation should be about 30-35 minutes, and we'll have time for Q&A and conversation after. So feel free as we go to pop questions in the chat, and we'll make sure to come back to them at the end there. So this project was funded by the American Sociological Association Fund for the Advancement of the Discipline. The goal of the project is to better understand the lives of LGBTQ plus folks living rurally in the inland Northwest, especially amidst the divisive politics of the current moment. It was inspired by interviews I did with rural queer and trans people in Eastern Oregon in 2017, as well as my earlier work on rural trans men in the US South, Midwest, and West Coast for my book, Men in Place. So in addition to the interviews you're going to hear about tonight, we've also been collecting and analyzing news and social media to help understand the politics of the region, and as well as investigating far-right groups that are active in the area, which Bobby has been really instrumental, especially in that part of the project. So for this project, we've interviewed 21 people in North Idaho and Eastern Washington over the summer and fall of 2020, with follow-up interviews in the last couple months. So on the right, you can see the approximate locations, and these are approximate, where participants lived. You can kind of see Spokane. I know it's a little hard to see the map, but you can see Spokane there and kind of get an image of this idea of the spread of folks. Part of the goal of the project was to understand how the 2020 elections affected these communities, but we had no idea how eventful and unique the past year would be, right? All of the interviews were supposed to be done in person, but due to COVID, they were completed by phone or by Zoom by Erin, Jessica, and myself. I had really been looking forward to traveling throughout the region for this project, but instead I have to admit that I've spent a lot of time here in my attic in Portland. So we won't talk much about the effects of the pandemic overall in the presentation, but we're happy to talk more about it in the conversation after if folks have questions about that. So the people that we interviewed ranged in age from 18 to 71, almost half, a little less than half being 25 or younger, so it skewed kind of young. The majority identified as white and have at least some college education. We all chose a pseudonym or a fake name that we'll we'll use for them, and we've changed some of the details to protect their identity and their privacy. These folks had an array of jobs and careers. They were social workers, teachers, counselors, students, local business owners, customer service workers, lawyers, as well as people who served in the military or are currently serving. So we're going to summarize some of our larger findings tonight, and we're really going to emphasize the voices of the people that we interviewed, bringing in a lot of quotes from the participants themselves. There's so much more that we could cover. It was really hard for the team that worked on this presentation to get it even down to this long. So, you know, again, we can go more in depth in things in the Q&A. I also want to give folks a heads up that we'll talk about some difficult subjects. We will repeat some slurs and some profanity. So just know that those things may be coming. Also, we know that some of you are familiar with the region and perhaps live in a rural area yourself, and others do not. So, you know, hopefully everyone will learn something, no matter how familiar you are with what we're talking about. And part of our purpose tonight is to really generate conversation and get feedback on what we're finding and where we'd like to go moving forward. We're currently not doing any more interviews, but you know, I'd really be interested in continuing if I can find the time and the resources, as I think we're just really scratching the surface here with these stories. So I'll give you a quick overview of what we've found. First, rural LGBTQ plus people wanted to live in the region for the same reason as other rural folks, right? Connection to place, a slower pace of life, a feeling of community, for some, the natural beauty of the area. And they also face some of the same challenges, right? High housing costs, difficulty finding high quality employment, and a lack of needed services in rural communities. The majority of the people we interviewed preferred living in a rural area and didn't feel like they should have to move because they were LGBTQ. If they did want to leave, some wanted to move to big cities, but others were looking for different rural communities where they might settle down or live for a period of time. A big thing that came out, and we'll talk about tonight, is that things are both better and worse for rural LGBTQ folks in the last few years. Some rural folks face greater challenges than others, different rural places and spaces may be more or less supportive, and that not all rural LGBTQ people have the same experiences, right? They're not universally bad, they're not universally good. And finally, we'll talk about this even more at the end, that support of rural LGBTQ people should fit rural spaces, right? It should fit those folks' experiences and their communities. So while the project and our presentation today is called Survival of Rural LGBTQ People, we really need to pause for a moment and recognize one person who didn't unfortunately survive. Jason Fox was a 19-year-old gay or bisexual multiracial man living in Newport, Washington, who was brutally murdered in September of 2020. 4 men have been charged, and this was when we were doing the first round of interviews. 4 men have been charged and are awaiting trial. They have not currently been charged with a hate crime, but Jason's family, friends, and others in the community believe that him being gay or bisexual was part of the motive for his murder. So while we're talking about a range of different experiences in the region tonight, we want to keep Jason and his story in mind. So looking across the interviews that we did, as I mentioned earlier, things have gotten both better and worse for rural LGBTQ people in the inland Northwest. Joe said, "I don't think the homophobia is much of an issue as it was back in the day. I think for the most part, people just want, you know, live and let live. I have my big old pride flag. I was hanging it out and every weekend just to get people knowing, you know? None of the neighbors did anything. They didn't throw rocks or call me names or anything." Now for Andrew, it was both better and worse. He said, "Just the fact that like people know that trans people exist is a step up from what it used to be. At the same time, with the rise of like Trump and alt-right ideologies, it's also gotten like gotten a little bit worse because like their ideology of hating queer people or like people of color and all this like Nazi ideology too. So in a way, things have gotten better and things have gotten worse. Now, overall, most of the people we talked to had mixed feelings about the level of homophobia, transphobia, and racism where they lived. For example, Anna said she didn't feel comfortable coming out as a lesbian when she was in high school. She said there were a lot of people who said that they believed that gay people should have rights and stuff like that, but then they also loved Trump and loved Pence so much and everything that they did so much, or they used like gay slurs. And it didn't feel like I would be actually accepted. Like they said that, and then other people were just blatantly really homophobic. Now, Carrie noticed a similar dynamic in her hometown. And she said, it is so community driven, right? It had this community feel to it, but also because of the undertones of like, you know, homophobia and racism and whatnot, kind of like this interesting dynamic of where people want to protect the community, but also they're so homophobic, right? So it's like, I love you, but I don't love you. It's kind of weird dynamic. Now, even towns that were generally viewed as more progressive could have that same mixed feeling to them. Brooke explained, Moscow is a bizarre place. It's like a progressive gem in the rural landscape, but there's also a lot of weird undercurrent stuff going on there. So like Moscow, you've got the university and there's a whole economy based around that. There's a pretty pretty cool local culture scene, food, art, music. It's all been shut down with COVID, but like there's also a church called Christ Church. So for those who aren't familiar, Christ Church is an evangelical church run by Doug Wilson, centered in Moscow. The church and its members have been trying to take over Moscow through buying property, through attempting to win local elected office, and other means. Among other things, Wilson has explicit ties to white supremacist organizations, though he at times claims to not be racist. And he is publicly anti-LGBTQ and misogynist. When another interviewee moved to Moscow with his partner, they were told by a realtor to only put one of their names on the paperwork because the seller was a member of the church and might not sell to them if they knew that they were queer. Right? So conservative Christian sects and churches that dominate in the region were a source of problems for many of the project participants, many of the folks we talked to, though others had mixed or more positive experience with organized religion, right? Some folks really received important and life-saving support from their church communities. Now, generally, interviewees told us that there were sometimes political divides between them and their neighbors, but that they were judged more on their actions and what kind of neighbor they were. Another mixed experience was where conservative neighbors might subscribe to homophobic or transphobic beliefs, but support individual LGBTQ people. They said, you know, it's more often about whether you're an asset to the community, like something like an essential business owner, how you take care of your property, whether you help each other out, right? Now, Carl described a rancher neighbor who was a liberal Democrat who had a friendship with another neighbor who was an ultra-conservative and also a rancher. To explain it, he said, cows don't care if you're a Republican or Democrat. One gets out, you know, you better help that guy, because if you don't, one of yours is going to get out. So we have to work together. Now, Ray said they mostly had positive experiences in his community. And he said, there's always going to be people who are going to be assholes. You've got the little mini fascists out here. But the bigger thing is, if it's snowy and your car goes off the road, it doesn't matter who shows up with the tow strap, whether they got a pride flag on the back up or not, as long as you're able to step up and contribute in some small way like that. So it's a common idea about LGBT people that the more rural you are, somehow that's more dangerous, right? It's a pretty common idea. But it's these kinds of dependent relationships that actually make smaller communities sometimes more safe. But there's a limit to that. Forrest said that he generally had good relationships with his neighbors, that being gay wasn't an issue, and that they helped each other out. But when he encountered other rural people that didn't know him or what kind of neighbor he was, he said that sexuality and gender could become an issue. He said, I've had people not know where I live, but mention that, oh yeah, you go by that place, that's where the faggot lives. They don't know that I'm the faggot that lives there, but that's how they say it. I'm not, dressing up the bird here. Those are the exact words they use. They're not going to say, oh, there's a gay guy or something. They'll use derogatory term in a derogatory tone, and yet not one of my neighbors would say that. Carrie said that people generally watch out for each other in her small town, but that folks don't stand up for people who aren't, white, cis, just kind of stereotypical redneck. So in that case, when there's conflict, people that don't fit as well might not be protected by other community members. It's also really important to note that rural means a lot of different things, right? It could be a college town of 25,000 people, a remote town of 200, or a county that only has a few thousand people. Some of the people we interviewed lived in small towns in the rolling wheat-covered hills of the Palouse or in other agricultural areas. Others lived in forests and rugged mountains where logging, mining, and outdoor activities were the main industries. And this also includes, of course, the native reservations and traditional homelands of the Colville, Spokane, Coeur d'Alene, Kalispell, and other native tribes and nations. So again, typically when we think about rural places, and this is true for the most part here, areas with smaller populations tend to have fewer resources, and community members are more dependent on one another for survival. It's this idea, you know everyone and everyone knows you. So describing her small town where she grew up, Carrie said, everyone knows everyone knows everyone's business. It's one of those places where you don't feel unsafe walking down the streets, you feel very safe. You also know that if you're doing something you shouldn't be doing when you're walking down the street, your mom will find out. So right, in the stereotypical thinking about LGBTQ plus people in rural places, it's this everyone knowing each other that can make it hard to survive in rural communities. But for a lot of people, it might actually be that having that personal relationship with other people, right, like the neighbors I described earlier, being part of a known family, or fitting in other ways that can really be protective. You also might know who the dangerous homophobic or transphobic people are and try to avoid them, right? Whereas in a city where everyone is a stranger, or even in some of the larger rural towns, you don't know who might be dangerous or who might be supportive. Also, there's potentially more accountability if you harm someone else in a smaller community, right? As Carrie said, your mom might find out, right? And not be very happy with you, depending on what you've done. So different towns were more welcoming or more difficult, and the size of that we found didn't really determine that. So local politics were fairly conservative in most of the places that our interviewees lived, right? In both Idaho and Eastern Washington, with a few exceptions of the more progressive towns like Moscow. But state level politics and policy really made a difference. Kelsey and her partner were considering moving out of Idaho. And she said, just because of the laws that Idaho has and the discrimination that we see, it's just not a place that we can continue to call home unless there's like an actual change happening, which sucks because obviously we want to be part of the change. But yeah, we're looking at more places like Colorado or Washington or Oregon to get out of Idaho. A number of people use that same phrase. I want to be part of the change, but certain conditions in their community or in the state that their community was in made that seem really daunting. Also, working for state or other public agencies offered different benefits in the different states, right? There were differences in minimum wage and taxes, which affected the desirability of living in each state. But despite those differences, the people we interviewed found advantages and disadvantages to living in each state. So we also found that particular subgroups of LGBTQ people experience greater challenges. For example, I think as Doug so clearly illustrated earlier, the challenges that elders face, the older people we talked to worried about a lack of community, about being isolated as they age, or about finding gay-friendly services or facilities when they needed them. People of color and white people reported seeing, rampant and visible racism in communities in the region, which they've reported has gotten worse since 2016. For example, March, who interacts with students at a local college through work, said, "It's very white here. I've talked with a lot of students about racism here at the college and outside the college. That is huge. That is a big problem. Students who are people of color have had horrible experiences with professors and just on campus and different things." Now, generally, this contrasts with generally students reported that colleges and universities tend to be more welcoming of them as LGBTQ. Now, Ada said that people tend to deny there's racism in small towns, including the one where she grew up. But her own experiences and watching the treatment of Latino farm workers working under white farm owners painted a different story for her. She said, "It does happen, and you see it so much because the inequality that happens between the farmers and the people that work the orchards and the mistreatment of migrant workers, of Latino workers." So some participants said that homophobia had generally gotten better over time, as I mentioned. People also frequently said that it was harder to be a gay man than a lesbian, bisexual, or queer woman, right? People talked about not only knowing gay men who were deeply closeted. And it was especially important for men or male assigned people to be masculine. So despite wanting to present more feminine at times, Court doesn't feel safe doing it in his area. He said, "I broke my water bottle the other day, so I needed to buy a new one, and I bought a pink one, and just the amount of crap I got for that," right? So, Court really got the sense that if he were to dress more feminine, to wear a skirt, something like that, that the reactions would be even stronger, perhaps even violent. Now, women who transgress gender norms shared troubles that they faced as well. Alex talked about how, as a stud or butch lesbian and who has a masculine presentation, she said, you definitely get looked upon, you definitely get, whispers behind your back and stuff like that. And it's a lot more complicated to go to the bathroom when you dress up like I do, because they think that that's weird. And they think that, oh, you're a guy and stuff like that, like you don't belong in here. Right, and not belonging, I think, in the restroom reflected the ways that this treatment made Alex not really feel like she belonged in the community. Now, interviewees agreed that transgender people, almost across the board, that transgender people face a far more difficult time, especially trans women. Several people mentioned that they could be out about their sexuality, but not their trans or non-binary gender identities. Victoria said, for example, that recently she's seen anti-trans sentiment on social media from friends on the reservation where she grew up. She said there's been this really big movement on we need to ban trans women in sports. But yeah, I've been seeing that growing from people I know on the res. So clearly the efforts across multiple states, including Idaho, to ban trans women and girls from women's sports and to pass other anti-trans legislation are circulating in these local communities as well. So one of the most consistent places people describe negative experiences were in K through 12 schools. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Erin to talk more in depth about them.
Thank you so much, Miriam, and thank you to everyone who is Zooming in with us, and I appreciate your time. So the school environment seemed to have a great impact on LGBTQ+ youth and the community at large. K through 12 schools are a place where participants addressed feeling underrepresented and felt that their schools lacked the resources to fully support the LGBTQ+ community. Whether this is due to a lack of knowledge on the community itself or an intentional effort against the LGBTQ+ community, this was an issue that most all of our interviewees brought up and expressed challenges with. Some reoccurring themes include the inability to create a GSA or LGBTQ+ club, homophobic bullying, and severe treatment or values that force members to change schools. What the community values has great influence on the resources the school provides in these rural areas. Our interviewees gave multiple examples of this. One participant, Winter, was talking about the school levy and stated, if the school did anything to piss off the community, they wouldn't get funded when the next levy came up. Like when the diversity club got called a gay club meant to bring about pedophilia for the next generation or whatever, they lost their levy immediately after and had to, in order to keep the budget balance, had to let go of several teachers and shut down a few programs. Additionally, Andrew was discussing his feelings about going to a different school in an area that shared his values when he stated, essentially because I was like, if I go to high school in my own town, like I'm going to be miserable. So it was definitely a lot different. Pullman was not surprisingly like a lot more accepting and has like a GSA. Life in a rural community changes in various ways once you identify as LGBTQ+. Peanut's response when asked if identifying as trans affected them living in North Idaho was, it made it a lot more difficult, like immediately made people I'd never talked to before hate me, whereas I've never done anything wrong with them. I'd never even talked to these people. There's a accumulation of reasons why I stopped going to school in Idaho, just like started getting threats and just like hearing bad things about me, and eventually someone carved "F you fag" onto my locker. Ada discusses an experience where her friend and her girlfriend kissed at a high school event and the wife of a teacher reacted poorly, she says, and she started yelling at her in front of the whole band, telling her that she should stop, that that's not okay what she's doing and it's embarrassing to the community. And just her actions were really inappropriate when, I mean, what do you do? Ada also describes the lack of support from her school staff she witnessed stating, this girl came out, the counselor from the school told her, don't, you can't. You're not even old enough to come out. You need to stay in the closet. And it's like hearing things like that from counselors, that means you don't have the support of anybody. These struggles are also endured by adults that work in the school system as well. Alex, talking about a school administrator who was openly partnered with a woman, said she had teachers that have like flat out refused to listen to anything that she's saying. So listen to anything that she's saying that, you know, are like praying for her. They're very much still like, you're going to burn in hell type of thing. So it's not surprising that she's facing that. Establishing GSAs in school was also difficult. When asked if there was a place for people to go to be their authentic selves, Victoria says, I remember when I was a freshman, there was a group of kids that wanted to start a GSA, and the principal said, no, exclusionary for straight people. And I was like, what? It's gay straight alliance. Yeah, so yeah, there's nothing. Similarly, Ray recognized the hypocrisy in his school's response to establishing a GSA. He said, matter of fact, I think they banned gay straight alliances the year after I graduated because they said it wasn't education related, but you can have the anime club? Come on, man. Although schools are a place where problems for the community happen, solutions can be found, such as creation and support of GSAs and staff education regarding the LGBTQ+ community, as well as implementing school policies that protect and support LGBTQ+ members' ability to be themselves in a safe environment. We can't just focus on students, but need to support the adult LGBT community members as well as allies who work in schools or who are parents. If we want to support the youth, we must support the adults as well. And now I will pass it over to Bobby, who will talk about the political climate.
Thanks, Aaron. And thanks for everyone being here. Can everyone hear me all right? Excellent, cool. So yeah, the divisive politics marked by the 2016 elections and the Trump era were only intensified in the run-up to the 2020 presidential elections when the study took place, especially in the midst of the pandemic and uprisings for racial justice. Since the 2016 election, interviewees expressed that conservatives and far-right attitudes have become more vocal and visible, citing an increase in Trump flags, red MAGA hats, thin blue line signs, Confederate battle flags, and the Gadsden "Don't Tread on Me" flags in their area. The following quotes here will highlight the key themes in relation to how politics made an impact on rural LGBTQ+ people in the last couple of years. Carl made note of the conservative atmosphere by explaining that, quote, the first thing you see when you come to this town is a billboard saying, welcome to Trump country, God, guns, family, and love your neighbor, go Badgers. And that you can see a lot of Confederate Trump flags and don't tread on me flags as well. For most of the interviewees, pro-Trump imagery like this was intimately connected to racism, homophobia, transphobia, anti-immigrant sentiment, and just general intolerance. The interviewees also already knew that the area was very politically conservative and that there were active white supremacists, Christian nationalists, and militia groups. For example, Carrie recalls her family warning her about driving through northern Idaho because, quote, that place has always been known for neo-Nazis and stuff. And now that the Proud Boys have kind of taken over. But the display of these symbols, along with harassment and public protest, have become much more visible and overt, and they were hard to avoid and or ignore. For example, Court described the area and when he moved there right before Trump was elected in 2016. He said, when I first came here, it was a lot of lock her up bumper stickers, and now it's a lot of Blue Lives Matter bumper stickers. But especially over the last year and a half, I've seen an increase in pro-Trump signaling. I felt a steadily growing sense of hostility to the outsider, that hostility to dissent, and just sort of this expectation that everyone is the same and everyone agrees. The threat of violence was also noted throughout the interviews by heightened visibility of guns and far-right activity in public spaces. Anna notes that visibility of these far right-wing activity at the college campuses by stating that, quote, right after Trump got elected, all the churches at WSU that were not like any of the churches that weren't Christian churches got Nazi symbols like swastikas spray painted on them. In addition to these cases of far-right visibility, Carl connects the rise of far-right wing activity with gun visibility by stating that, quote, you see these people gathering more and more frequently and more heavily armed, and they're showing up with bulletproof vests. They're not showing up with just a rifle, they're showing up with assault rifles and lots of them. Interviewees also reported an influx of people moving into the region. Part of this influx has been triggered by the efforts of right-wing groups that encourage conservatives, Christian nationalists, and survivalists to move there, which has made an impact on the interviewees and how they navigate their environment. Winter describes the Redoubt movement, a political migration into the Northwest to create a safe haven for far-right Christians in Priest River, as incredibly active, and that, quote, they had published plans to turn Priest River and the surrounding areas into an island of defensible space by blowing up all the bridges. The Priest River Redoubt movement has not done such an action, and Winter is, quote, not incredibly concerned about them blowing up the bridges. Another interviewee, Alex, noticed a big, quote, resurgence of hate crimes and that we are home to white supremacists. These groups that are like moving in to take advantage of the fact that there's like nothing out here. These public displays of planned violence and have been hand in hand with migration narratives from far right wing efforts to create a conservative stronghold in the American Northwest, which has had impact on rural LGBTQ+ people and their community. In a post-Trump America, many interviewees have mentioned that many Trump sides have come down, but not all of them. Many Trump signs are still up, and along with defeated conservative governor, Washington nominee, Lauren Culp, and tensions around COVID-19 measures are still strong. While most of the participants are glad that Biden was elected, some don't have faith in Biden being progressive enough, or that they see themselves as independents and want more compromise in politics between parties. However, these acts of violence and visible far right are countered by acts of resistance by the community as well, which Miriam Abelson will discuss here.
Thanks so much, Bobby, and thanks, Erin. So as Bobby has shown in rural communities in the Northwest, these rural communities are really under threat from a divisive political climate, a rise in far-right activities, as well as rural gentrification, which comes both from people like the survivalists and their right-wing migration, as well as people relocating to so-called Zoom towns, right, as the pandemic makes work at home more of a possibility. So in some ways, LGBTQ people, people of color and Native people, people who are poor, working class, as well as older people are likely to be the most vulnerable to these kinds of threats. So at the beginning of the presentation, I mentioned the murder of Jason Fox, an event that affected a number of the people that we interviewed. After not getting much sustained press at the time that it happened, more recently, the story was picked up on TikTok and started to receive wider attention due to the efforts of Jason's mother, Pepper Fox. So this attention resulted in a parade and march of a few hundred people through Newport, Washington, and adjoining Old Town, Idaho on April 3rd, which would have been Jason's 20th birthday. And it was the first Pride parade in Pend Oreille County, as well as in Old Town, Idaho. Now, the rural LGBTQ plus people we interviewed and their communities resisted the challenges they experienced in multiple ways. Some were involved in community organizing for local human rights work. They were involved in union organizing, running for local office, volunteering in their community, as activists protesting on street corners, or working for statewide initiatives like expanding healthcare and public health care benefits, or addressing environmental issues. Others worked in social services and did work in schools, as I already mentioned. So from Post Falls to Priest River to Pullman, right, we saw mutual aid, we saw self-defense groups, human rights organizations, and individuals resisting and creating community and even creating joy, right? Now, some of these groups also prioritize supporting people of color and Indigenous or Native people. In the town with the Trump country sign that Bobby showed earlier, a group even erected this billboard in the center, emphasizing diversity and inclusion. So things like visiting gay bars or nights in Spokane, Coeur d'Alene, the Tri-City areas in Southeast Washington were really important for socializing for the people that we interviewed. Though of course, some people just aren't bar people, or maybe they're in recovery. It can also be hard, as people told us, to find a date in a sparsely populated area, whether you're gay or straight, for single folks. And pride events like those that are held in Spokane, Moscow, Coeur d'Alene were important for some of the people we talked to celebrate, right? And feel like there were other people like them. At the same time, some of the people that we spoke to were critical of some of the messaging of mainstream LGBTQ plus groups and events like Pride's because they were not progressive or critical enough. Right? At the same time, small gestures like a rainbow sticker on an office door, a business with a safe space sticker, or a Black Lives Matter sign could have a significant impact on feeling safer, feeling welcomed, and feeling seen. So for some, resistance was just continuing to exist and live their lives in their communities every day. And for a few, participating in this research project was also a form of resistance for folks who saw, very little representation of themselves as rural LGBTQ people, right? This was an effort to share their stories so that others, like perhaps some of you watching today, might see yourself reflected or something like your life. So to sum up, while there are rural LGBTQ people living happily in the region. I know we talked about a lot of the challenges today, but there are people living happily, living their everyday lives. But of course there are still many challenges. And as I said earlier, most people having really mixed experiences. One of the key takeaways here is that support for LGBTQ plus people in rural areas has to address what the needs are in that place, right? Across identities, ages, and even political orientations. For some, right, the rainbow flag and the pride parade are going to be really important symbols of visibility that make a strong statement and make them feel a sense of not being alone or isolated. In other places or for other individuals, we have to remember that it's perhaps not safe for them to be out, and also that being out might not be important to them. For those folks, a large in-your-face queer display that doesn't fit to the town or region might just create backlash for the LGBTQ plus folks that have been living quietly there all along. And beyond that, we want to end with a few other recommendations that came from the interviews about how to focus support for these communities. So first, again, support must focus on making rural people's lives livable. I think Tylene sort of said this in the mission of the Pride Foundation, right? To make rural people's lives livable now where they are, right? Those efforts to support rural LGBTQ people and other people who are marginalized in rural communities needs to help shift those places to be more hospitable, right? And not just assume that the solution is to move somewhere else, right? Though sometimes that is what folks need to do. It's also the idea that youth shouldn't have to hang out or hang on until they go to college to find support, or that they should have to move to an even more unaffordable city where they don't necessarily have family or friends. Schools and youth program, as Erin really spoke to are important sites, not only to support young people, but also the adults that work there. Also, a number of participants said that they wanted to stay and make their communities better, but that their concern was sending their kids to local schools, right? And so that part of their reason for leaving some of their communities is to find better schools for their kids. As I mentioned, elders also worry about aging in place in rural areas, especially if they don't have children. So LGBTQ friendly services and facilities are absolutely necessary. Seeing broader representation of LGBTQ rural lives can also help combat feelings of isolation and loneliness that some folks experience. Opportunities for people to connect, right, and for communities to come together are really key. And I know some of you, I know lots of you are doing this work already. I want to point out that the internet is a powerful tool for connection. That might not be new news for any of you here, right? We're all here on Zoom together. But expanding broadband internet in rural areas, it's really an important infrastructure project, and that can really help further connection for rural communities, and especially help rural people who are marginalized in those communities as well. Also, investments in rural communities that preserve those communities, right, and resist rural gentrification are also really crucial. We found that as the kind of communities break down, as the communities suffer, as change happens, it's not always necessarily beneficial for the LGBT folks living there, right? Those stronger communities are often safer. So finally, as this truck, I found this picture and I just had to share it. Finally, allies are really important, right? But people talked about allies that actually follow through in their support, right? Including family members, friends, neighbors, and local leaders. That's true for racism as much as it is for homophobia and transphobia. So I want to end here by just saying thank you again to the Stellar Research Team, Total Dream Team, the representations of the organizations who spoke earlier. Thank you all so much for attending, for taking a part of your evening to listen to the voices of the people who we talked to. So we'll have time for Q&A and conversation now. I think we'll start if there are any questions from the chat. But regardless, if you'd like to speak, please use the raise your hand function on Zoom and we'll go ahead and call on you. So thank you all so much. All right, let's see. So I'm not seeing any, Bobby, am I missing any chat?
Yes, nothing came up on chat, but I think Carrie has her hand up right now.
So I just want to say thank you, first of all. That was really interesting, and I'm really interested in kind of seeing more of the work as well. But I just was curious, as you were talking about the different interviewees and their experiences in these rural towns and that sort of thing, there was kind of almost like a live and let live for some of the participants, it sounds like. But I'm kind of curious how many of the participants that you interviewed were in maybe a public relationship, or were the majority of them kind of single and trying to get through it and, that sort of thing. I was just curious if that colored their experiences at all.
That's a great question, Carrie. And I think that really gets to this, we didn't talk about it as much, but this sort of issue of visibility in a way, whether someone's, because being in a relationship with someone, can make more clear, a visible relationship can make more clear what or people will make guesses at least about their sexuality, right? So yeah, that definitely mattered in terms of, people being able to be under the radar if they weren't in a relationship. Of course, that also increased some of the, the isolation and loneliness we talked about. And that's also, I think, where, you know, the people that we talked about who, whether they were trans or not trans, who didn't conform in terms of their gender, right? That often was kind of a proxy, right, for people assuming who they are. That live and let live attitude is such an interesting thing. And, you know, one of the things that we saw is that sometimes people who were totally visible benefited from that live and let live attitude, right? It wasn't one of the people that we talked to, you know, I think talked about their friend who had their house in a area that other people would think of as like a conservative rural area, and it was just covered with like every pride flag, trans flag that you could think of, right? And it was very sort of visible and in your face. And, you know, again, I think because they're part of the community and because of, you know, some other things that they were able to live okay. The other piece, and then other people can speak too, of course, because I'll go on and on, but clearly, is that this divisive political environment that Bobby really spoke to the most in our presentation is really harmed that live and let live attitude. Yeah. And the other thing is that, you know, people are talking about this far right migration. You know, it's sort of this sense that people come and they think that somewhere like North Idaho or parts of Eastern Washington are like this, you know, far right wonderland, and that they actually seem to feel more enabled to say their terrible homophobic, transphobic, racist beliefs, right? Which really affects that sense, that live and let live attitude that was more common to the communities before that, right? So I think that's another thing.
Yeah, my son, Ryan, right here, is identifies as gay and biromantic, and you know, he'll walk in the community here in Coeur d'Alene decked out with his pride gear. But honestly, as his mother, I don't worry so much about that as when he does find a partner and walks down the street hand in hand. I worry a lot more about that, you know, and so we have lots of conversations about safety and being yourself, but also being aware, you know, of where you're at. And so I just didn't know if any of your respondents had spoken to any of that. So thank you.
I have some questions in the chat. I'll just say them in the order that I received them. The first one was, this is incredible. Oh, sorry, it's from Denise. And she said, is there a published version of this that we can refer back to?
Thanks, Denise. So the plan right now is we're going to make a 1 or 2 page summary that we're going to be able to distribute. So it's something we're sharing with the people that we did interviews with. We'll certainly share, you know, with the organization. And I don't know, Jessica, is there an email list from the event that we could send it out to?
Yes, we can do that.
Awesome. And so we'll be able to distribute it that way. You know, I'm an academic, so I'm going to write some articles and perhaps with other members of the research team. And those can certainly, you can always email me and I can send them to you. You know, those take a while to come out. I'm hoping that, you know, maybe if I say this enough, it'll actually happen, that that a book will come out of this project as well. So, you know, so those are the different things, but definitely in the short term, in the next month or two, that we'll share that at least 1 to 2 page.
The next question I have is from Teresa Davis, and it's, during your research, did you find that more people in the LGBTQ community are starting support groups or making stronger connections via online technology or via group threads on phone apps?
That's a great question. Denise, thank you, or Teresa, sorry, thank you for that. I'll start to answer it, but Aaron, Bobby, or Jessica, if you have things to add, please do. I think it's a real mix. You know, one of the strange, you know, as I mentioned, one of the strange things about this project is that it was done during this COVID year. And so most of the people we talked with were spending almost all of their time online. So they even had to, I remember interviewing a few folks and them saying like, oh, I guess I'm talking about when I used to interact with people out in the world, even though I'm not doing that right now, depending what their situation was. So yeah, so online became became even more important. And I think that both of those things were happening, right? So online groups were really active. And then also, I know some of the, if I'm recalling correctly, Erin, you may be able to speak to this too, not to put you on the spot, but I think about some of the mutual aid groups among some of our younger participants, and I feel like, group threads on phone apps were probably big in that. Do you want to?
Yeah, absolutely. It was definitely important for folks in areas where they felt like visibility wasn't an option for their safety to communicate via like WhatsApp and maybe texting, things like that, where it was just a better opportunity for them, especially during COVID that was heightened, and people made connections via school and continued that on, with technology in maybe areas that where they could feel more visible, but due to COVID, we're abiding by those guidelines. So I would say definitely it was more common with some younger folks, and that seemed to be more increased in areas where they didn't feel safe being visible, or COVID was really rampant.
Great. I'm just going to mix things up and go away from the chat and go to Brian, who has had his hand up for a little bit. Brian, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah. Yeah, I just wanted to also say that this has been a really great conversation. Miriam, I would say I'm a librarian at North Idaho College, and I do collection development, and I would say that that is a area of need in regard to research. So I would really encourage you to move in that direction in publishing. But I grew up in Priest Lake, which was at the time, 500 people in the winter, and would balloon a little bit like Coeur d'Alene does in the summer, but went to school in Priest River. And this was in the early 90s. And I've shared with others that at that time, I didn't know anyone who was out. And that was primarily because you knew it really wasn't safe. And it's interesting to hear these same stories, especially from people from that town 20 years later, to see that, not a lot has changed in that regard. And being cis male, I obviously don't have a lot of overlap in this area, but it is interesting to see the commonalities in regard to the dominant culture and not having a community really to connect with if you have areas or interests outside of that dominant culture, and how even if oftentimes you don't even really realize that until you maybe spend some time away. My wife and I moved away and then came back in 2016. So some of these things that I don't think I really ever considered have definitely resurfaced in the last few years of feeling like there is a community, and terms around inclusiveness and multiculturalism being stigmatized and politicized in a way to create wedges between people. So I really applaud the work that you all are doing locally and regionally, and would definitely continue to try to provide support in any way that I can as a member of this community here and in a broader community. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Brian, for sharing your experiences. And librarians are my heroes. So, thank you for the work that you're doing. It's really important. And yeah, I think that, there's something interesting about, there were other towns that that people spoke to that like Priest Lake, or pre-server that that had that more closed mentality, not just for LGBT people, but it was really, and, some of the folks that came from that area really talked about that they've felt that really strong threat of violence, as people were very armed, especially since, 2016 becoming, more armed, I guess, even though that's a normal, right, that's normal, but like even more so. So, hopefully I think there are people doing work to make change. So I'm hoping we'll hear more positive experiences as time goes on.
I have another question from the chat, if that's okay. Or how much time do we have?
About 9 more minutes.
Okay, I'll just go ahead and say the next question from Katie Rogers. She says, thank you so much for sharing your research. Did your interview talk at all about the downside or negative impacts of increased trans visibility, both in terms of positive representation and negative representation? Like now that rural cis people know trans people exist, does that make life harder at all for trans people? Does that make sense?
Thanks, Katie. That's a great question as well. And I'm trying to remember if any of our, people definitely talked about the anti-trans bills that were active. I think those were passed just as we were kind of gearing up the project. So those are really fresh in people's minds and they were definitely thinking about them, as well as some of the stuff, some of the, bills that had happened in Washington as well, maybe a little earlier. But I'm trying to remember if they talked about the negative sides of trans visibility. I know that other people I've talked to in other places have, where it's the sense of, in the past, you could be a trans person living in a rural area and really because of this lack of knowledge of trans people or that trans people would be in rural places, right? Like that's just a city thing, that someone might be able to live under the radar pretty easily. And so, yeah, I think that that the increased visibility, even if it's positive visibility, can have a negative effect in a way, which is surprising, right? But also just that people talked, I think, about like the psychic toll of seeing these hateful messages, whereas maybe people weren't talking about trans people in the past. Seeing this really visible backlash was certainly affecting people. Does Aaron or Bobby or Jessica, do you remember any specifics on that you want to share?
Maybe specifically, the person that was living in Whitman County voiced like frustrations with having to address people that knew him before he transitioned, and that they're visible, but that he was seen as almost like an education tool to educate people further on trans people in general. And I think I remember him citing that was really challenging because he's explaining his transition, nor should he be required to, but that doesn't mean that is everyone else's transition. So just that tokenism, I'm sure, is pretty challenging, visible or not.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron, and thanks for that great question again, Katie.
Do we have time for one more, or is that it?
We have like 5 or 6 minutes left.
Okay, then I'll just go ahead and go to the hand up. Joshua, you have a question you want to ask?
I do, thank you. Such good information. Even though sometimes I feel like that was a very familiar story. It's just kind of nice to reconnect and see what the experiences are for people who are living in those areas now. Because they may have been different than what mine was, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And so it's just really good to get this information. So thank you. My question is, for me, when I was coming out, it was in Ellensburg, and I was really drawn to LGBTQ organizations as a way to get support, but I also know that there were a lot of people who avoid any kind of like LGBT identity-based organization. And I've always kind of been curious, like what it is about why some people are drawn to it and why some people aren't. And I was just wondering if you've came across any kind of dialogues or experiences through your study that might like paint that picture, that picture a little bit more about why some people, because there are some organizations, in this area that you studied, but some people might just not want to go to them.
Thanks for that. Thanks, Joshua. And then, I'm glad and not glad that some of this seems familiar to your own experience. Maybe says we're getting some things right, but also, so, I'm thinking here about, another project Bobby and I are working on together. This issue really comes up, and I think that it's true here as well. So, I think that for people of any age, to actually go and engage with an organization can be some risk, right? To say, I remember one of the people we interviewed was doing a table at a Pride celebration, and people were nervous to come up to it. And they, what they said to them was, well, if you're here, then people that are going to see you are here too. So that says something about them, right? But I think that fear is real, especially for people that who very much could still lose their job, or their family or other things, for being more visible. So I think there's that. I think that sometimes people don't always want to engage because they also have to declare something about themselves. You know what I mean? Maybe they're not ready to yet, right? To really take on that identity, to say to themselves, I'm, this is my gender, this is my sexuality, whatever it is. That can be an intimidating process for some folks. Some people, don't come out till late in life, right? And so engaging in those more visible things. And I think that what Bobby and I have found in this other project we're working on, that the interviews I did in Eastern Oregon spoke to this, where people said, youth, particularly, this is a youth project, youth focused project, people often said, I'm so glad like the GSA at their school is there, but I don't go to it because, I don't really like it, or I don't get along with the people there, or, what have you, but I'm so glad it's there. Like, I know I can go there if I need it. So I think that's a big piece. That it's complicated. Yeah. Thanks. Maybe we could do like one more, maybe two.
Let's go to the chat and go to Denise, who was next. That's okay. They asked how can those of us who are based in urban areas show solidarity or provide effective support to our rural siblings?
That's such a great question. And that's one I'm always asking myself. And so I see the work that I do as part of solidarity, to see that like, where regardless of where we live, like our liberation is caught up in each other's, right? And I think that a piece of it is, from what we've heard from folks, is, sometimes the sense of abandonment, I think, to say like, we're here, things might be great in Seattle, they might be great, or in Portland, which, let me tell you, they're not always great, but but we need people to recognize that we're here living, that there should be representation that reflects our lives, and that you can come to our events, right? That you can come, like, everyone doesn't have to go to Seattle for Pride, but what does it look like when people from Seattle are going to Coeur d'Alene Pride? Or, I think the march in Newport and Spokane, right? The guy that picked that up on TikTok, whose name I'm blanking on, lived in Las Vegas, right? He used his stimulus check to fly to Newport, or fly to Spokane, I guess, and participate, right? And so I think that that's really the key thing, to show up and to really listen, right? And to not impose, as I said earlier, urban solutions, urban values onto people living in other regions or in rural areas. Well, and it looks like that's 7:30. So I'll just say, I mean, I guess, I would love to hear too, I'm seeing some great stuff in the chat, but I would love, to hear more from folks here, even if it's in a different space, of what could projects look like going forward? How could this work that we've already done support efforts locally? My email was, I'll put it again in the chat. But yeah, I hope this conversation continues and that, that we can make more meaningful change going forward.
Well, thank you everyone for coming. And I know I personally, participation in the Northwest Rural Project and listening to the lived experiences has helped really support my own work here with the North Idaho Pride Alliance, with our board of directors and volunteers and partners. So thank you again. This has been wonderful to see so many different groups and individuals come together about this really important topic. And definitely always feel free to reach out to us here at nipridealliance@gmail.com or find us on Facebook or Instagram. Good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you.